He's a former senior advisor to the Secretary of Defense under Trump and now the CEO of Our Country, Our Choice. Retired Colonel Doug Macgregor back on the program. Colonel, nice to see you again. So a real easy question. How about it? Why do this 62 days before Trump takes over when he's already had Zelensky and Putin on the phone and they were talking about a peace deal?
This is a very serious matter, and you're not overreaching in your comments by any means. I think there are a couple of things that Americans should think about right now. The first is that this is a blatant attempt by President Biden's administration, and I say administration because, frankly, I don't think President Biden is aware of everything.
Agreed.
I haven't thought that that was the case for a long time, but the people behind him, some of whom are appointed, some of whom are not, are obviously quite aware of what's happening. And this is a deliberate attempt to overturn the election results. This is not just about creating permanent hostile conditions between the United States and Russia and making it very difficult for President Trump to overcome this hostility and negotiate an end to this war. This is something much worse, Dan. You know, I don't think it fits the definition, the textual definition of treason, but let's stop and consider for a minute. This is pretty damn close.
Yeah.
Because they've elected a new president. The will of the American people has been signaled clearly, unambiguously. They don't want a war with Russia. They haven't signed on for it. In fact, I don't know of Americans anywhere outside the Beltway who want war with anyone. So this is now very dangerous, and the Russians may feel compelled to respond. But let's stop and also see what happened. We fired 6 Army Tactical Missile System missiles. I don't know how many of those we've even gotten left right now. I mean, our inventory is so low. But of those 6, 5 were shot down. I guess the 6th one was damaged. It fell to the ground and started a fire, but it did not damage the target, which was to the north and a little west of Moscow. So there were no injuries, and as far as we know, no Russians were killed. But Putin has already, as you say, made it very, very clear what he would not tolerate, except that in the wording of the statement that he gave was, if Russia and Belarus or White Russia faced an attack of overwhelming conventional power, conventional missiles, conventional strikes of some kind, or conventional forces, they reserve the right to use nuclear weapons to respond. That has not happened. This is a very modest attempt, but now we know that the French have Scalpel missiles, a cruise missile. The British have the Storm Shadow. They may be showing up in greater numbers now in Ukraine. And then the Germans have said that they would provide some sort of set of unmanned systems. At any rate, how bad does it have to get before the Russians decide to do something?
Right.
But I think this is the biggest issue right now immediately. This is probably going to trigger the destruction of what remains of Ukraine. Over the weekend, they annihilated the Western power grid. That means that everybody, as the winter approaches in Ukraine, is going to share equally in freezing. And this is not going to be something easy to deal with. Remember, this state's population has been reduced from almost 40 million down to, we think, something like 18 million.
Oh my goodness.
So Ukraine is dying. And in the midst of its death or near death, we're actually making it worse. We're promoting the destruction of Ukraine, which is a humanitarian catastrophe on top of everything else, simply because they're unhappy that Trump won the election and they want war, when the American people clearly do not.
Doug, what other reason besides we want to give Donald Trump a war instead of peace because it'll be a win for him? Is this just because the military-industrial complex wants to keep making billions and billions of dollars? So because Joe's checked out to lunch, he signs off on this garbage? I mean, we're talking about a world war here. I see that Sweden and Finland already put out advisory notices to their citizens on how to survive a potential war. That means NATO thinks this is going to happen. I mean, we're only 62 days out from peace. Like I said, Trump's been on the phone with Zelensky and Putin, and they were both talking about this. And now we're literally talking about a possible nuclear war. This is insane to me.
Well, it is, but there are a couple of things that unfortunately are working against people like you and me and other Americans that don't want this. The first is that the so-called military-industrial congressional complex is very interested in continuing to enrich themselves. There's no doubt about that.
Yep.
But I don't think they actually believe that a nuclear strike could happen. I think they have, from the very beginning, they have grossly underestimated Russia. They said the Russian military was incompetent. It was too small, too incapable to do anything. And we've seen this relatively small Russian army metastasize into probably the most deadly army in the world right now, along with an arsenal of missiles and rockets that dwarfs anything else on the planet. But for some reason, they continue to underestimate and underrate things. And I think their view is, oh, that's just bluster. Don't worry about it. This man, Putin, isn't serious. And I'm very afraid that he is deadly serious, as he's demonstrated to this point.
Mm. Doug, I hope that you're wrong. You barely ever are. And so I hope cooler heads prevail. Hopefully Trump can get back on the horn, calm Putin down, and we ride out the next 62 days until we can get peace in Ukraine. Colonel Doug Macgregor, as always, it's a pleasure to hear from you and get your insight. Thank you, sir.
Now, one last comment, if you got a second.
Yep, go ahead, Doug.
What happens in Ukraine does not stay there. In other words, if hostilities commence between us and Russia there,
right,
that's going to have a very nasty effect in the Middle East.
Yeah.
Because Russia stands by Iran as it is, and Syria, and the other Arab states. And I think ultimately Turkey as well that will come into this. So this doesn't help anybody. It hurts us in Europe. It hurts the United States. It promotes war. And this is the last thing that Americans want. I wish there were a way to hasten Donald Trump's inauguration to get this behind us.
Yeah, I know. I wish we could have it tomorrow. Just take over and put this to bed. Colonel, as always, thank you, sir. Appreciate you.
Thank you, Dan.
Wish it was a different subject matter. Thank you, Doug.